Hey everyone, thank you for watching. Today's video I'm really excited to do. I'm going to be ranking new eyeshadow palettes. I did this video I think 2 months ago and I had a lot of fun doing it. In there I ranked 10 different eyeshadow palettes that were newer to me, from 10 being my least favorite down to number 1 being my most favorite. I really love the way that Jen Loves Reviews does her kind of like her monthly favorites. She does it in a countdown style, so I wanted to create some sort of countdown style myself, and so I decided to focus it on new eyeshadow palettes. For this month I have 5 different palettes that I am focusing on, and if you want to see my countdown on these, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Alrighty, so like I said, I have 5 palettes for this video. I really wanted to do this video like every month because the last one I did got such good feedback and I was really excited that you guys seemed to like the idea, but I also want to make sure that I'm including, you know, enough looks in the videos of the different times I've used the palettes. I want to really use, you know, a lot of shades out of the palettes and really give it a good actual review instead of just like using it once and then, you know, sharing my review on it. So it's taken me a little bit longer than I thought. Like I said, we only have 5 this month, but I'm still excited to do this, and I already have 4 palettes for the next video. I didn't want to wait this one out any longer, so we're just gonna go ahead and do a 5. And I do want to say that I genuinely like all of these eyeshadow palettes. I really do. In the last video, I was kind of like on some of them that I mentioned, especially in like the, you know, 10-9 spot. But this time around, I really do like these palettes. I think all of them have like good qualities to them and all of that. So I did want to point that out because I have a feeling what I mentioned at number 5 and then maybe even number 4, people are gonna be like, I can't believe you don't like that palette. I really do like all of these. So it was actually really challenging to rank these. I kind of had a tough time. I of course factor like price into everything, but one of the biggest kind of factors, I guess, that went into this ranking was how much inspiration do I find from these palettes, how often do I really want to reach for them, etc. Because like I said, I do think they're all pretty darn good. But at the number 5 spot, this might surprise some people, this is the Huda Beauty New Nude eyeshadow palette. Now this is a $65 eyeshadow palette, so that is pretty pricey, and that definitely played into, you know, kind of my thought process of where I was going to put this palette. I love the looks of this palette. I think that it's beautiful. It has a nice mirror inside. I did have a subscriber send this over to me, which I was so excited about because I kept thinking about purchasing the palette, but to be honest, the $65 was kind of getting to me. Some of the past Huda palettes, like her bigger ones, have been hit or miss with people, but I started to hear some pretty positive things about this palette, and I just thought these tones are so me. I feel like I'm really going to get on with this. Inside you have 18 different shades. You do have a concealer. I have some tape over this down here, but you do have a concealer shade to, like, you know, start to like prep the eyelids, which I think is interesting. You have some glitters in here, you have shimmer finishes, you have mattes. Again, you have this nice mirror. So the first time that I used this palette, I used it in a trying new makeup style video, and I was really curious to try out some of these shimmers because some of these shimmers in here, they look like they have, they just look a little bit different. They look kind of like chunky. I was really curious how they would apply on the eyes. I did try a brush with it. I mostly just apply makeup with a brush, to be honest. I don't use my fingers a ton when I'm applying makeup. I just don't like it. I don't like makeup on my fingers. I have long nails. I don't like digging into eyeshadow palettes, etc. But of course, every time I use a brush, I have to get so many comments of like, you need to use your fingers. And I'm like, okay. So the next time I tried this palette, I went ahead and used my fingers. And honestly, I would prefer to use these shimmers with a brush because when I use my fingers, I might get a little bit more payoff like quicker, like more pigment a little bit quicker on the eyes, but I also get so much fallout when I use my fingers and like chunky fallout onto my eyes. Whereas with a brush, I don't know if it's something about just like smooth, I don't know what it is, but I don't like using my fingers with this palette because I was getting makeup all over my face, which I did not appreciate. So for these kind of like fun shimmers in here, how I said I thought that they might be a little bit like just on the different side. They're not, they're just shimmers. There's really nothing like super special about them or anything, so I was a little bit bummed about that. The mattes are pretty. They really are. I don't have a lot of issues with them. They blend out easily. Some of them you do have to build up. You know, there's a lot of lighter tones in here too. Some of them you have to build up, which sometimes isn't a bad thing. Sometimes I'd rather build up than have too much pigment on my eye, and I'm kind of struggling to blend things out. But one thing that I feel like I kind of am noticing about this palette is kind of what I just said. there's not a lot to me that screams that this is really special. And again, for the $65 price tag, that's kind of the biggest factor of why I put this in at number 5. Again, I like it. I think that I've created some pretty looks with it. And I don't mind it. I'm going to continue to reach for it. If I had purchased this myself at the $65, I do still think I would have kept it. My guess is that if I were to buy this one, I would have bought it with some sort of sales. I think that I would keep it because, again, I like these tones. They definitely are me. But I don't love this palette. I don't know if I don't feel like it's worth that high price tag. And while the looks you get are pretty, I just don't feel like there's a lot special about this palette. I think the concept behind it was that's kind of what Huda Beauty was going for, in my opinion. You have a concealer in here. You don't get that in a lot of other palettes. You have glitters in here. You have mattes in here. You have these shimmers in here. So you have like different formulas and a big variation of formulas in this palette. So it's like, oh, it's supposed to be super special and very unique, and you can do all of these different looks with it. And I just don't really get that vibe once I really started getting in there and trying out the different shades. I think that it's a pretty palette. I think I create nice looks with it, but I don't see super special with this one. So that's kind of the biggest reason that I put it in at number 5. Again, I still like it and I still think it's pretty. I like the looks that I've done with it, but not to the point where I'm like, yes, girl, you know, you can only get those looks from this palette, that kind of thing. So very pretty still. I like it. Just, I wouldn't say that it's any sort of a favorite of mine. Okay. Coming in at the number 4 spot. This one was so hard. I honestly had this at number 2 for a while. I put it at number 3. I ended up putting this at number 4. This is from Dose of Colors, and this is the Pretty Cool eyeshadow palette. This palette is $32. Again, how I've been saying, I like all of these palettes. I like this palette, I really do. So inside you do get a double-ended brush, and I actually like the brushes that come in the Dose of Colors 5pan palettes. You have more of like a pencil brush on the other side, and I use this as a flat shader. I've used it to get really like precise into the crease. I like these brushes, so they typically stay with me. And then you have 5 different shades inside. This is a cool toned palette. You have kind of these brown, these taupey shades, etc. I really like Dose of Colors 5pan palettes. I own the mauve, I own the brown, I now own the berry, I own the Pretty Cool, I own a lot. The orange one, I own that one. I really like these palettes. I think that they are very nice quality, and I feel like the quality in here is the same. So all of the looks, again, that I've done with this palette, I think are really pretty, but I feel like with this one and how I decided that it was going to end up at number 4 is that I do feel like I kind of do the same thing over and over with this palette. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. For me, I actually like smaller palettes like this that have more of a color story, that I can kind of reach into it and know exactly what it is that I'm doing, because I'm not the most artistically creative person, and I appreciate that one for this. Again, I like this palette. I do appreciate that for this palette, but sometimes as I've been going through this review process for this video, I'm like, oh, you need to do another look with the Pretty Cool palette, and I put it down because I'm like, I feel like I know what I'm gonna do, and it's gonna be a dark smoky eye, and that's all I'm doing with this palette. I just don't do a lot of variations with this one. I just kind of go for the same thing. But I like the looks that I've been doing with this. I feel like everything blends really easily. Everything builds up really nicely. I like all the shades in here. I like that you get a solid brush. I think that's really good. I like the packaging on this. I like that you get a mirror. You know, $32, that is pricey for a 5pan palette. So again, that kind of factored into this as well, because yeah, smaller palette, but still a higher price tag. I still do recommend these from Dose of Colors. I think that they're really nice. I just don't feel like again, maybe it's like the most special palette, the most needed palette. I definitely don't think this palette is for everybody, but if you love kind of those darker tones, if you like the cool tone palettes, you know, you could really like this one, but I think that is pretty darn good. I like it. It's not a favorite. It's not my favorite Dose of Colors 5pan palette that I've tried. I think it's pretty good, but not a favorite of mine. In the number 3 spot, this was another one that I was having a hard time deciding where I was going to put this palette. It's actually the palette that I have on my eyes today. This is from Sydney Grace. This is the Autumn's Rain eyeshadow palette. This palette is $52, which that is, you know, that is pretty pricey. Inside you have 5 times 3 is 15. You have 15 different shades inside. Sydney Grace is an indie brand, so I will have, of course, the Sydney Grace website linked down below. I will link all of these products down below. So inside you have these 15 different shades. You do also have a mirror, and then you just kind of have a variety of shades in here. You have mattes, you have shimmers, you have some warm tones, you have some, you know, this really cool tone, kind of like taupey shimmers in here. You have purples and greens. Again, it is what's on my eyes today. I have Supreme Harvest blended into the crease. I have Amber Jewels on the lid, and then Golden Scepter is what's on the inner corner. I do really like this palette. Again, I like all of these palettes that I'm talking about. I do really like it. I do think that it is pricey. I do know that sometimes with indie brands, the cost does have to be a little bit higher because they don't have, you know, what the traditional brands do. So I do get it. This was the first time that I was trying out the Sydney Grace eyeshadows, and I do have to say that I'm very impressed. You know, I was working with like this really deep kind of orangish red shade and putting that into my crease. I normally would go in with like a light brown or something first to kind of blend it out and then blend in a deeper shade. And I was like, you know what? I'm trying something different today. Clearly, this is not a look that I do a ton, and I just went right in with that one, and it was so easy to blend out. Overall, I'm very impressed with this palette. I would recommend it. Again, you know, you would want to make sure probably that you're going to use the majority of the shades that you're really going to like these, because, you know, the price tag is just a little bit high. One thing too that why I put it at the number 3 spot is I started to feel not super inspired by the palette, which is a little bit surprising to me because we have so many different colors to choose from. But again, I had a couple of those times where I picked up this palette and was like, I don't know, and I would put it down and grab something else. So again, that's kind of, since I like all of these palettes and I think all of them have their own kind of like pros and cons, I was really trying to go by which ones inspire me the most, which ones do I get the most different looks from. I can't say with this one that there's, you know, a lot of super unique shades in here that I just don't get from a lot of other palettes, you know, and that sort of thing. But I did also want to give it some extra points because it is an indie brand, which I think is awesome, and I think that they did a really good job. I think that these are really good quality eyeshadows. One other thing, the mirror in here, at least my mirror, I don't know if anyone else has one like this, it's like distorted. Like I can't do my makeup in this mirror, and that is an important factor for me because that is how I do my makeup. I do my makeup pretty much in the palette that I'm using, especially when it's coming to my eyeshadows. And something about this mirror, my face is distorted in it, and it makes me kind of like go cross-eyed when I'm looking at it too much. So I can't actually use this nice mirror in this palette because something's a little funky in there. But other than that, you know, I do like the packaging on it. I think that this is a really good palette, and I would still recommend it. Again, it's not a favorite, but I still think that it's pretty good. Moving on to the palette that I think I struggled the most with coming up with this review. This palette I have had in the 5, 4, and 3 spot, and I ended it up at number 2. I have just struggled so much to get my thoughts together with this palette, but the number 2 spot is going to the Natasha Denona Gold palette. Okay, I felt like my voice was like cracking when I said that because probably I know how much money this thing costs. This palette is $129. I also did have a subscriber send this to me, which I'm just so thankful for. I really wanted to test this out, but even, you know, I was saying like, oh man, $65 for the Huda palette. That's a lot of money. No, we're talking $129. I didn't know if I would ever own one of the larger Natasha Denona palettes. You know, I've tried her smaller ones and like her mini palettes and all of that, but I just never knew if this one would be coming. But I'm so grateful because I love to review products. I love it. I love making review videos. It's what I enjoyed the most probably on my channel. I always find ways to just chat about makeup, but at the same time that I'm chatting, I'm reviewing in there too. I'm just trying to do it in a bunch of different ways with a bunch of different series, if you will. So I've been so excited to test this out, and since I got it, I have been getting so many messages from people on all of my different platforms, here on YouTube, on Twitter, in my Instagram DMs. When are you reviewing the gold palette? What do you think about the gold palette? Hey, I know that you're going to review the gold palette, but can you just tell me right now what you think about it? I have gotten the most questions on this palette. I went back and forth for a very long time, but I'm here to tell you my thoughts right now. I really, really, really like this eyeshadow palette. I do not love this eyeshadow palette, but I really, really like this palette, and I think that it has its pros and I think that it has its cons. So one thing that I don't think I really love is this like plastic flap that we have going on here. I don't I don't like that very much. It has like the shade names on it. I just think it's annoying, and I kind of am still considering like cutting it out. Inside you have 15 different shades. You know, obviously we have a very, you know, strong theme in here with the golds, you have the browns, you have these beautiful shimmers. There's really nice mattes in here. The first time that I ever tried out this palette, I, you know, went into a couple of the mattes first and was blending it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is going so, I immediately was like, this is what everyone was saying good things about the gold palette. I understand. The mattes in this palette are beautiful. They're so easy to blend. They're like effortless is what I'll say about the mattes. You know, I'm not a makeup artist. I don't have like the highest makeup skills of, you know, all of the YouTubers on here, but when I go into the mattes in this palette, even some of the darker ones, I'm like, girl, you got matte skills. Good job. So I think that that's amazing. A lot of these shimmers in here are pretty, but the mattes definitely steal the show for me, and some of the shimmers are kind of hard to work with. This one right here, I was really surprised. I did a look with this one the other day. It was very gold and shimmery, and there was some blue in there. I was following a tutorial from I Love Sarah E, and who's one of my favorite, you know, YouTubers. I follow her tutorials a ton here on YouTube, and I was just surprised because I'm following along her tutorial and she goes into this gold and it just looks so beautiful on her eyes. I went in without a damp brush first and had like nothing on my eyes. I used a damp brush and I still had to go in. And finally in that look, I actually topped it with a little bit of this shade because I was like, I don't feel like I'm getting the same look as Karen is right now. And I was really bummed about that because I just thought that one was going to be so like stunningly beautiful on the eyes, but I definitely had to work for it. Some of these bronzy shimmers I haven't had any issues with. The center gold, I think that is really pretty. Again, the mattes are what really steal the show out of this eyeshadow palette. And I really like the different combinations of the browns. I love that we have this kind of like dirty yellow in there. I feel like I've gone into that shade almost every time I've used this palette. It's one of my favorite shades. It's one of my favorite colors to wear. I think it's beautiful. I really like that we have the additions of those blues. This is a palette that I do get inspired by. And again, that's why I really wanted to say that was a big way that I was ranking these palettes, because I like all of these palettes. I get really inspired when I look at this palette. I get really excited to use this palette. I get excited to try different color combinations. I get excited to do, you know, the browns. I get excited to do the gold. I get excited to bring in the blues. So that's a really, really big thing to me. And I also feel, you know, I did say that I followed I Love Sarah E's tutorial, but the other times that I've done looks with this one, I've done them, you know, just kind of off my own, and I follow a lot of tutorials. I feel like I can create some fun things. So that's really why I did rank this so high. Another reason that I ranked it so high is because I feel like there are some really unique shades in here. And you know, that's kind of what I said about some of the palettes that I put higher up. I don't feel like this is super unique. I don't feel like I can't find other shades similar or even other palettes similar in my collection. When I first got this palette, I asked, I think it was on Instagram stories, what do you guys want to see with this? Do you want to see 3 looks? Do you want to see in first impression? What do you want to see? The most common response that I got was, dupe it. Dupe it. Can you dupe it with singles? Can you dupe it with other eyeshadows? Can you even mix 2 other eyeshadows but still be able to get this palette? And that's why you haven't seen me using this a lot on my channel, because I've been trying to do some sort of dupes with this and I'm not doing a very good job. At least in my collection, I'm not being able to find a lot of dupes for this. You know, some of the matte browns in here, sure, but some of the more, you know, interesting, unique shades in here, I just can't really find them. And even with the matte browns, these are honestly some of the best mattes that I've tried. So I could probably find really similar color dupes in my collection, but not a formula that makes me feel like I'm a blending rock star, okay? So that was another reason why I put this one really high up, because I do feel like it's unique. And if you're going to pay a higher price tag for something in this day and age, and if you're a lover of YouTube, you know, maybe you have a larger collection or a YouTuber yourself, it's kind of hard to get that unique factor these days, and I really feel like you get that with this palette. Now, I know a lot of people are also going to say, is this palette worth the high price tag of $129? I honestly don't think so, unless you are like a true high-end lover, a true Natasha Denona lover. You don't flinch at spending $60, $70, $80 on eyeshadow palettes, you know, and there's plenty of people out there like that. There is zero wrong with that. There's zero wrong with where you decide to spend your money, what your makeup preferences are, etc. There's zero wrong with that. So if that is the category that you fall into, I think that you would love this eyeshadow palette. If you are someone who does not normally spend that amount of money, I hope that you're listening to what I'm saying the pros and cons are, because again, we're all different with our preferences. So maybe I said something to you about the mattes being so easy to blend. Maybe you're someone who has a tougher time blending, and maybe you're trying some eyeshadow palettes that you just can't get that blendability down. Maybe you really wanted the colors in here, but you were a little bit worried about it. Maybe that would be, you know, something that would sway you to say yes. And, you know, maybe some of the cons that I've said, you'd be like, oh, you know what, no. If I did spend, again, if I did spend the $129 on this palette, again, there's no way I would have spent $129. I would have gotten this on some sort of sale, I can tell you that for sure. Would I keep this palette? Yes, I would. So I hope that helps. You guys know I really do like high-end makeup. I really do like luxury makeup, but I am still someone, you know, I was poor for a very long time. And I think that when you are poor, and you are as poor as I once was, you kind of never let that go. You kind of never let that feeling go. I know what that feels like. And so sometimes it's not super easy for me to just say, yeah, go out and spend $130 on makeup. I have a really tough time doing that, and it's probably evident in these videos. We are gonna take a pretty big turn to talk about the #1 palette. This is the most affordable palette that I am talking about, and this is one that has just impressed me from the moment I put my first brush into this. It is the Colourpop It's My Pleasure palette. This is a $12 palette. So we have taken a big turn. We've talked about, what have we talked about? 65, 129, 52, 32. Now we're ending it on the highest note, and we're talking about a $12 eyeshadow palette, okay? This is from Colourpop. Like I said, It's My Pleasure palette. This palette is so nice. The Colourpop pressed eyeshadow palettes I think are so good. When I first started trying out Colourpop and their Super Shock shadows, I did not get it. I did not get the hype. I did not enjoy it. Once they started coming out with these pressed shadows, I was like, they are nailing it. I have a ton of Colourpop palettes, a lot of palettes that I purchased myself. I did purchase this one myself, and I have been so impressed. This palette is so nice. I did a video on Thursday, affordable options for high-end makeup, and I mentioned this palette against actually a Huda Beauty palette. Obviously the Amethyst palette, I mean, that's no surprise there. This palette is so nice. I have used all of the shades now on my eyes in some sort of capacity. I think that it's great. I like the packaging on it. I like that you get a mirror. I like that you have the 9 shades. I like that you have a color story, but it's still, there's enough variety in here that you can kind of do a variety of different things. You definitely get like a variety of shades in here. I mean, obviously you have these beautiful purples, you have some really nice mattes, you have the pinks, you have some duochromes. Every time I've gone into this palette, I have finished my look and been like, girl, you killed it today. That is how I feel every time I reach into this palette. And again, it's $12. I think the quality is so good. So I just put this up against 4, you know, pretty costly eyeshadow palettes, and the Colourpop It's My Pleasure was a clear winner to me. Like I said, I liked all the 5 palettes that I was doing, but as I was making my list, this one, from the moment I started trying it, was #1, and it never budged from that spot. It never budged. I think it's a great palette. I think it's fantastic. So after that, that's gonna wrap it up for today's ranked eyeshadow palettes. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful in some way. Please let me know what you thought in the comments down below. What palettes have you tried? What maybe are you interested in trying now? Like I said, I already have 4 more palettes on my list. I might wait and get a 5th one and then do another 5. You'll have to let me know though if you want to see me continue to do this style of video, but I have a lot of fun doing these. And as always, if you guys did enjoy this one, I hope that you'll give it a thumbs up. I hope that you'll also consider subscribing before you go, and I'll catch you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye.